The protests in Iran have continued to spiral. The Iranian economy is right now in a terrible state. If you are Iranian, half of your savings have been whittled away, but from the start of 2025 to the end of 2025. Your savings are being whittled away. The cost of living is increasing. The cost of housing is increasing. There are real economic issues that have besieged Iranians. And the sanctions from the United States that doesn't just hurt this, it worsens the situation. It's an extra pressure on the situation. It has no sign of letting up. Donald Trump has given no indication that he wants to remove the sanctions. And so for now, we can assume that they're probably going to be in place for the next 3 years, which restricts the markets that the Iranian government can export their fuel to, which is one of the few things keeping the Iranian economy afloat. But it has still not been enough to ward off these longer standing economic problems in Iran. I mean, the electricity outages and shortages. These are issues not just of sanctions. These are also issues of administration. And so when the Iranian government comes out and says, we're going to negotiate with you, how do you negotiate away bad management? How do you tell somebody who doesn't know how to do their job, I'm going to negotiate you into doing your job? I'm going to negotiate you into stopping the electricity shortages. I'm going to negotiate you into dealing with the water shortages, which is not just a problem of bad administration, it's a problem of Mother Nature. I'm going to negotiate with you on X, Y, and Z issue. And so when the Iranian government tells the Iranian protesters, we are going to negotiate with you, what does that mean? What can they negotiate? What can be discussed? Can they increase pensions? Can they give some sort of handout to keep people afloat while they wait for some opening down the line? Where is that opening down the line? Will the sanctions be removed in the next 3 years? Will they re-engage in negotiations with the government in the United States that doesn't seem quite reconciliatory towards the Iranian atomic program or the regime in general? Probably not. So there would have to be something else. Is there some foreign assistance that's going to be coming from China or from Russia? Well, I think the Russians are a little preoccupied right now. And the Chinese, while they're buying up the vast majority of Iran's exports, this economic situation got us here under a situation where the Chinese were taking in those imports. So when they say, we'll negotiate, I don't know what they will negotiate. That's my main concern, is that I'm sure most people would like a peaceful resolution to this, but I don't know exactly what the Iranian government can offer the Iranian people at this stage to assuage their concerns. I don't see it. And so that's why I am worried about where it goes from here, especially since we have now gotten the first fatality of the protests. The Iranian government says that an IRGC, that's an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps soldier, a volunteer, was killed in one of these protests, which have spiraled out from the marketplaces. Now, we don't know all of the circumstances of their death. Of course, the Iranian government is not going to be the best source of information for an unbiased view of exactly how these protests are going. But as that has happened, at the same point, the American and Israeli governments have responded. We already covered some of the Israeli government response, where the Israelis are saying to the Iranian people, rise up, overthrow your government. We're with you. We have agents on the ground. They're trying to speak out there like they got the microphone and they're like, go team, go. They're cheerleading with pom-poms on the side, trying to see the Ayatollah fall. But if you look over at the United States government, we got a different statement from them, which was quite interesting. Trump and top Iranian officials exchanged threats over protests rolling in Iran. Let me read you the threat from Donald Trump. U.S. President Donald Trump and top Iranian officials exchanged dueling threats Friday as widening protests swept across parts of the Islamic Republic, further escalating tensions between the countries after America bombed Iranian nuclear sites in June. At least 7 people have been... By the way, can I just remind you guys, we were told that program was obliterated. I'm reading reports as of 1 month ago of the American government is now considering follow-up strikes. If the program was obliterated, why do we need to bomb it again? If something's obliterated, that usually means that it's gone. If somebody said, hey, I obliterated Dylan, he's gone. It'd be kind of weird if I was hosting my stream 1 week later or you had to go obliterate me again. At least 7 people have been killed so far in violence surrounding the demonstrations, which were sparked in part by the collapse of Iran's real currency, but have increasingly seen crowds chanting anti-government slogans. Some of those slogans are like down with the regime. Some of them are pro-Shah. You know, of course, Iran's previously deposed king that was overthrown in of course, it was overthrown by the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But of course, the Shah is long dead. It would probably be his son if the Shah was to retake power. But I have yet to see any evidence outside of the support that does exist in the diaspora that the majority of Iranians at home really want to see the return of the Shah. It's very hard to get information on these types of things, though. But the protests have continued to spiral. Now, in their 6th day, they've become the biggest in Iran since 2022, when the death of 22-year-old Masha Amini in police custody triggered nationwide demonstrations. So that has to do with a woman who was not wearing her hijab properly. She was a 22-year-old woman who, again, she was wearing her hijab. It's just she didn't wear the hijab correctly, and so the police beat her to death. And that got a lot of people in Iran angry. And in Iranian society right now, enforcing those types of laws around headscarves has gotten very difficult because more and more women are just straight up not participating in the law, as they see it immoral for the state to tell a woman what they can and cannot wear. Certainly, if you're going to beat a woman to death over what they can and cannot wear, even when they follow your laws and they put it on, they might not follow it correctly and still be beaten to death. That sponsored a lot of protests. But let's be clear, the protests that are happening right now are not about women being beaten to death for not properly wearing their headscarf. The protests that are happening right now don't have to do with government critics being arrested and executed. The protests that are happening right now are spawning out from the economy. But because of the Iranian regime's tendencies to lapse back into violence in response to these types of events, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' hold over society, it's hard for me to see, once those negotiations occur, if they occur, and they go nowhere, which is to be expected, do the protesters just go home? Or do they protest, the protest spiral and get more violent, and then the protesters are met with deadly force? And it's not going to be as simple as the government just collapses. It would probably be waves of violence before anything like that could happen due to the stranglehold that the IRGC has in society. Let's be clear. It's not as simple as, oh, there's an army and a base over there. The IRGC is embedded in society. They have spies everywhere. They have them in your neighborhood. They have men who have guns ready at a moment's notice to get out on the street and get to work. So it's not as simple as the government, the economy is going downhill. We all go outside the presidential, the home of the leadership, and then you say shame, 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 and then it all collapses because they have people embedded in society to help suppress movements that can build to that point. And they have suppressed it violently in the past. And so that's something that I have concerns about. The American presidency has responded by saying that if there is violence like this, the United States will, and I quote, come to their rescue. Let me read you Donald Trump's statement. Trump initially wrote on his Truth Social platform, warning that if Iran violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States will, and I quote, come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go, Trump wrote, without elaborating. After that, the Iranian government, of course, responded. Trump should know that intervention by the U.S. in the domestic problems corresponds to chaos in the entire region and the destruction of U.S. interests. The people of the U.S. should know that Trump began this adventurism. They should take care of their own soldiers. Now, let me be clear. If the Iranian Islamic Republic collapsed, that would probably be a good thing for America's interests in the Islamic Republic was one of the main reasons that one of the worst dictators that has ever set foot in the Middle East, Bashar al-Assad, and that's saying something, stayed in power for a decade longer than he needed to. They executed children into giant death pits. They went and they massacred entire towns, flattened cities. It was very, very brutal. And the Iranians diverted a lot of resources to support the government there, as did Hezbollah. So I could point to that. I could point to the Houthis, of course, being against America's interests. And for the United States military interest in the region, those funds for weapons and missiles and such being cut off would probably be a good thing. But that also assumes that if the Islamic Republic goes under, that these programs will necessarily stop. Maybe some of them will, maybe some of them won't. And it will all depend on what next government comes into power, which might be sympathetic to what we have to say, or otherwise could be angry at what we have to say. Especially if the public is convinced that we're in it for our own ends, we're not in it with their interests at heart at all, and all we want to do is dominate the country and her resources. And considering Western interventionism and its history of colonialism in the past, also in interventionism specifically in Iran, that is not a conclusion that has come from absolutely nowhere. So I think that by making these public statements, I don't know if Trump's really helping. Because what exactly would we do when we say we will come to their rescue? What message are we really sending to the Iranians? Because if there are Iranians who are thinking about challenging their government or going blow to blow with the regime, I mean, you got to pick up a rifle, you got to risk your life, you got to risk your family's life, you got to risk your neighborhood getting shot up, you got to risk your house being burned to the ground, you got to risk everything when you try to overthrow the government. And if the United States comes in and say, we will save you, we're your saviors, and they take that and they act on it, what happens when our support is we bomb some tanks, we bomb some soldiers, but there's hundreds of thousands of IRGC infantrymen all over the place? What are we going to say then? Oh, we're going to take the entirety of the U.S. Air Force, we're going to park it off the shore of Iran and have an endless bombing campaign of these assets? Are we going to put troops in Iran to fight a civil war between some coalition of opposition forces, monarchists, Democrats, maybe some communists, I don't know, versus the IRGC after Trump campaigned on anti-interventionism? You know how weird it is to be in this position where the president of the United States thought it was too costly for America to send aid to Ukraine, but it's not too costly to get America directly involved in a possible civil war in Iran when we could be using our direct military assets to do so? When we were the Houthis, we were bombing them at such a pace when Trump got into office that we were literally using more missiles than we could make to bomb the Houthis. And the Houthis aren't gone. They're still there. They can still threaten the Red Sea. That hasn't disappeared. And so what exactly are we going to do here that is so not costly in comparison to us sending aid to the Ukrainians? It's infuriating to see the inconsistency in policy between nations to say, oh, we would not, our main concern should be realism, the humanitarian concerns of X, Y, and Z. And then we hear this about we're going to come and save the protesters in Iran with our air campaign, which isn't even realistic. So how does this end? I don't think this ends well. I think this ends violently. But I also don't see the Iranian regime has weakened its grip enough to let go. And so while I will not completely discount the idea that the Iranian people could have finally been pushed, too hard, they're generally young population. It's something like 40% of the population of Iran is under the age of like 25 or 28. It's a very young population. So there's a lot of people who could literally participate out on the streets, but you got to get them there. And you've got to overwhelm the system that has been set up for decades to deal with something just like this, while the United States and Israel is openly talking about intervention in your country. So what can the government do? Oh, you guys aren't real Iranians. You're Israeli agents. Oh, you're not real Iranians. You work for Trump. You work for the Americans. The first segment I saw in the Young Turks talking about these protests was not about the economic destitution of Iranians. It was not about, the repression of the regime. It was not about even the possibility of violence down the line. It was about Israelis and whether or not their agents is what's provoking the protests. And while I think that's bad reporting from the Young Turks, I also think that that is a direct consequence of us putting ourselves in this protest movement. I think we could end up counterbalancing the protest movement, making some Iranians who would have been maybe sympathetic saying, well, of course, I have to deal with the bad economic situation. You can't deny the price tags. But now they're being overwhelmed with, but I don't want our country to be dominated by the United States. I don't want our country to be dominated by Israel. I don't want to go be part of a movement that not only could lead to me endangering my life and my family, but could also lead to me being in cahoots with those who seek the destruction of my country. And so if there is going to be any sort of revolution or end of the regime in Iran, it's going to come from inside Iran. It's not going to come from the United States coming out and saying, we're going to save them. Operation Provide Comfort was a band-aid after we overpromised to the Kurds. We don't need a repeat of that in Iran. Okay, what's next?